Installing and configuring SQL Server 2005. Alright, so it seems with each new version of SQL Server that we get, installation becomes a little more easier. And this version is no different. In fact, this version is actually fun to do an installation. And I know you're probably going to laugh at that, but it is. It's fun. And I'll show you when we get into a demo here how much fun it really is. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about the first half of the video is everything installation. We'll start off by analyzing the different editions that are available to us, try to figure out which one will best suit your environment and your needs. We'll then move in and I'll talk about the new installer enhancements because in the past Microsoft has always kind of built their own proprietary installer for each version of SQL Server. Now it uses a standard, which is the Windows installer. So we'll take a look at some of the new enhancements in the Windows installer and what it can do for us. And then we'll also take a look at upgrading to SQL Server 2005. We'll do some tips and tricks, excuse me, and some guidelines to follow if we were to do an upgrade and how we upgrade the engine and all the components. And then we'll move into a demo. We'll actually do an installation on our local VB Nugget machine here. We'll install the SQL Server 2005 Standard Edition. And then we'll move into configuring SQL Server. We'll configure all the different services that are installed, the component services of things like SQL Server Agent, reporting services, integration services. We'll then configure our actual instances of each database engine. And then we'll also move in to configuring server security. So without further ado, let's jump right into the different additions we have available to us and also some installer enhancements. So starting with the additions, we have 4 common flavors of sql2005 that we'll see in our everyday production environments. I say this because there are actually 6 flavors total. The other 2 I'll briefly mention here when we get done with the additions, but these are the 4 that we're going to see in our everyday environments. We have Enterprise, Standard, Workgroup, and Express Edition. Starting at the top, Enterprise and Standard. These are very similar in nature. The difference lies in the bells and whistles. Enterprise Edition, every bell and whistle you can think of. And of course also no limitations anywhere. Pretty much all the processors it can consume, the number of processors that are pretty much in your box and the amount of memory that's also in your box. And the only thing I want to mention here is most of those bells and whistles lie in the high availability side of things and also the business intelligence designer side of things. So if you need an environment that needs to be up 24/7, minimal downtime, then this is the edition you're going to choose. And again, where those features lie, the high availability side, things such as online indexing operations, parallel index operations, things like failover clustering. There are no limitations to the amount of nodes in your cluster. And also database mirroring. There are no limitations to the amount of CPUs that you can use. Standard Edition has limitations on all of those things. In fact, all the online indexing operations, parallel indexing operations are not even available to Standard Edition. And these are all things that we're going to talk about when we get to the respective video. One thing I do want to mention is they both do support 64-bit architectures. So that's kind of cool. Standard Edition never really used to support that, nor did, and plus it always had memory limitations. So really you get a better value add for your dollar with Standard Edition. In the past, SQL 2000, I kind of just want to mention this, people are always forced to go with the Enterprise Edition for things such as failover clustering and things like 64-bit architectures. Well, now Microsoft decided to give you more value, again, more bang for your buck here, and you can spend a little less, get a little more if you go for Standard Edition, because in the past, again, most of the time, Standard Edition was more than enough for your standard everyday environments. But your decision will probably come down to if you need those extra highly available features, then you're going to need Enterprise Edition. Otherwise, Standard Edition will probably do you just as good. Workgroup Edition. This edition actually does not support reporting services, nor do we get SQL Server integration services. So really what they did is Microsoft trimmed out the whole BID side of this. The Business Intelligence Development Studio does not exist in this edition. Some good news, however, is that in the past with Workgroup Edition, we always had 2 processors and 2 gigabytes of memory. Well, Microsoft was nice and they gave us an extra gigabyte of memory, so now we have still 2 processors, but we get 3 gigabytes of memory with Workgroup Edition. Some other things with this is 64-bit support, but only if you have a Windows on Windows available to you, otherwise known as WoW. Same with Express Edition. Same as 64-bit on WoW. Express Edition is really cool because it's free. It is very similar to MSDE. MSDE, of course, was in SQL Server 2000, the Microsoft data engine, and it was a super lightweight version of SQL Server. Really, it was just basically the database engine itself. There was really no easy way to manage it. You could hook up to it in SQL Enterprise Manager and manage the databases, but really that was about it. Same with Express Edition. Really, there's no SQL Server Management Studio, so you can't really manage or administer anything about this. You can hook up to it from your development environment, however, and manage your databases that way. Or if you're good with T-SQL, you can manage it that way as well. But Express Edition is great for learning. An excellent little free platform to go ahead and run your queries against, create databases in, and pretty much just get dangerous by using Express Edition. Two other editions that I wanted to briefly mention was, of course, the Developer Edition, and the Developer Edition is pretty much Enterprise Edition. The only difference is it's not licensed for anything but development or test purposes, so no production anything with your Development Edition. And also Mobile Edition. Mobile Edition is very neat because it allows you to extend your SQL Server installation to support mobile devices. Also, what you do with Mobile Edition is install it on your machines with basically your developers' machines that have Visual Studio 2005, because that'll give them all the projects and templates available to create applications for mobile devices. And the mobile devices that SQL Server 05 supports is pretty much anything you can think of: cell phones, smartphones, PDAs, the list goes on and on. So those are the other two little hidden additions that I don't have on here, simply because they're not common. But if you ever come across them, they are fairly easy to use. I also want to touch on some installer enhancements, and basically what we have now, instead of, if you remember, any other SQL Server installation in the past was kind of Microsoft's proprietary little setup programs that had that old green screen that we always had to stare at. Well, now we have a much more intuitive Windows installer. And the Windows installer, if you've ever installed an Office, for instance, Office is pretty cool in the fact that you can pick and choose each component in Office. You can say, yeah, I want to install Word. Nah, I don't feel like installing Outlook because I already have it installed. I feel like installing Excel, and then you can get detailed in each one of those. You can install certain features within those components and products. Well, that's kind of how the Windows installer and exactly how SQL Server works. It breaks down each component into its own little mini product, and then has all the different features underneath there, so we can flip them on and off as desired. So very, very cool. It's the installer of the future, and SQL Server finally takes advantage of it. We also have improved error logging, and just improve logging in general, because now each component has its own separate log. And also alerts have gotten better too. If you have any problems or any errors are detected in these logs, the alerts have gotten a little bit more intelligent in the fact that if it knows what error happens, it can point you in the right direction to get it resolved. We also have the System Configuration Checker, the SCC. This is really, really cool because it's going to analyze pretty much our entire machine, our entire setup, and it's going to make sure that we have the required components we need to continue. And really what this is going to do is it's going to define if we have any blocking requirements. And a blocking requirement is, of course, anything that will stop our installation from going further. And it'll also notify us of non-blocking requirements, things that are nice to haves, and you'll need this feature. If you don't have this component installed in your operating system, then you can't have this feature, things like that. So very, very intuitive, the System Configuration Checker. We'll get into this and see how it works when we get into a demo. Also, remote installation has been super simplified. I like to say super simplified because now you can just simply pass in the computer you want to install it on, administrator username and password at the command line of the setup.exe, and boom, you're remote installing. How slick is that? Another one for the DBAs and administrators out there that you're going to love. If you've ever done image-based deployment, where you basically wanted to mass deploy SQL Server based on a predefined installation, in the past, we always had the computer name statically placed inside of our setup or our configuration file. Well, now, SQL Server is smart enough to know that if the computer that it's being deployed on is different than the name in this file, then uh-oh, we got a problem, and it'll automatically change it for you. So just a lot of little features like that scattered throughout the installation app that is really going to save us time and hassle in the long run, and also scattered about in SQL Server itself. So I'll try to bring these up as I remember them as we get on with them, but there are a ton of them out there. So that's just one of the really, really neat ones that'll save people a lot of time and hassle. And we'll see most of these when we get into a demo of our installation. But before we do that, let's talk about upgrading. Upgrading, believe it or not, has become a very painless process as well. And the reason being is because of our new intuitive upgrader. And again, it's the same thing. It's a Windows installer, very intuitive, very handy. And we have a couple of other cool little tools that we can use to help us along the upgrade path, if this is the path that you choose. A couple things I want to mention. If you are going to do an upgrade, there's a couple of requirements you have to meet. SQL Server 2000, Service Pack 3 or later. If you have that, then you're qualified to do the upgrade. And SQL Server 7.0, Service Pack 4 or later, is also a candidate for an upgrade. If you have a SQL Server 6.5 installation that you desperately need to upgrade, I just advise upgrading to 7.0 first and then upgrading to SQL 2005. One of the new tools that we have is the Upgrade Advisor, and this thing is very slick. It's basically another Windows installer application, and it actually comes on the SQL Server installation disk. So you'll see it right when you pop in your disk, and I'll show you where it is. It's right on there on the main page. It's one of the tools that you can install as an add-on. Also, Microsoft always updates this with the latest and greatest, so the latest version is always on the web, on their website. And what this basically does for us is a mock upgrade. It does an upgrade without actually doing the upgrade and records everything that happens. So it'll record all your blocking and non-blocking issues. It'll record any issues, any conflicts between your components. It's very, very handy. It does take a little while to run just because it does do a mock upgrade, but very handy. So if you're going to do an upgrade, I strongly advise using this tool. Very easy to use. You can't do much but choose what you want to analyze for the upgrade and then click on Analyze. And it'll take a while and come back with a very detailed report. Very handy little system there. Also, the downtime is substantially decreased. So if you're doing an upgrade on a production server, these upgrades happen pretty quick. So especially if you're going to do every component, it may take 10 or 15 minutes, but substantially decreases to previous versions of SQL Server in doing an upgrade. Speaking of the components, it's a very painless process to do these upgrades as well. The only one that's a little painful is the reporting services, but I'll show you how to get through that without much pain. Analysis services, very, very simple. You're gonna just simply do the upgrade during the upgrade process. You're going to be using the Analysis Services Migration Wizard, which you can choose to do during the upgrade process or afterwards to bring your Analysis Services 2000 packages over to 2005. Also, integration services. This is really neat. You don't have to do really anything at all to bring your 2000 packages over to 2005. They'll all run seamlessly without any intervention, and the reason being is because by default, the DTS 2000 runtime automatically gets installed inside of integration services. And you'll see there'll actually be a legacy node installed inside of the SQL Server Management Studio, and underneath that there'll be a DTS, a Data Transformation Services node, so you can still manage your packages that are in a 2000 format in 2005. If you want to actually edit them, though, you're going to need to go out and get the Package Designer for 2000, which is a set of tools inside of the SQL Server 2005 feature pack, and that'll allow you to edit those 2000 packages in 2005. But you cannot edit your 2000 packages from 2000. But very, very painless process. Even converting them to 2005 is very painless. And again, if you do not choose to do this during the upgrade process, you can use the Package Migration Wizard to do so. Reporting service is a little bit different on the other hand. It's not that it's a pain in the butt to do. It is just there's a lot of steps that you have to do. And what I'm going to do here is if you're going to upgrade the report server itself, refer to Books Online. They have a very, very nice walkthrough step by step on how to upgrade your reporting services instances to 2005. So if you did happen to use reporting services for 2000 and you're going to do the upgrade, definitely refer to Books Online there. Again, just a lot of things to do. Not very difficult though. Reports, on the other hand, very, very simple. If you just want to, if you have a new installation of reporting services and you want to deploy your 2000 reports to 2005, very simple. Just simply deploy those reports to a 2005 server. Business Intelligence Development Studio will notify you that these are not in the correct format. And the reason that is because RDL, the report definition language, has been upgraded a little bit. So it can do some new things. And that's all it's going to tell you is that it needs to be upgraded to the new RDL format. And there's no going back once you do it. You cannot put them back into 2000. So make backups of your reports before you do that. And then just simply convert them and deploy them to the new reporting server. And boom, you're on your way. Another really cool thing, though, is Upgrade Advisor takes all of this into consideration. Every single one of these components, it'll do a detailed analysis on for you, and it'll tell you if you have any inconsistencies or any conflicts in your analysis services packages, it'll let you know. Your DTS packages, if you have any tasks inside of there that are not compliant with 2005, it'll let you know. Another thing about integration services is if you had any metadata repository packages, metadata repository is no longer supported in 2005, so those you'll have to convert on your own. But Upgrade Advisor will catch that for you. Same with reporting services. So Upgrade Advisor is really our lifesaver here because it does everything for us. It takes away all the pain of upgrading and gives us nice detailed reports of everything. All right, let's move on into an installation. Let's take a look at how this stuff works. So we're going to go ahead and open up my computer here. Inside of the DVD drive, we have SQL Server 2005 Standard Edition. So I'm going to double click on this to fire up the auto run. And what will happen is we basically get a brand new looking installation screen. If you remember the old SQL Server 2001, this one has a little more on it, and this is what we'll be getting familiar with over the next few years. And basically we can do a few things. We can review the hardware and software requirements, read the release notes. Here is where we install the SQL Server Upgrade Advisor. So if you're going to do an upgrade, you're going to want to install this, run it first, do a mock upgrade just to see what could happen. And then we can do a server install or a client install. This is basically holds everything, including the server and the client tools. This one just will give you the client tools, and then the other stuff here is pretty self-explanatory. We're going to go ahead and install everything here, so I'll click on the server components. First thing that pops up, of course, you want to read the EULA and accept the terms and conditions here. Click Next. The first thing that's going to happen is SQL Server is going to check and install all the prerequisites. And what this consists is, of course, the Microsoft 2005 set of support files. You'll also have the .NET 2.0 framework checked and installed at this point if it's not already, which since I have SQL Server 2005 Express and Visual Studio 2000 installed on this specific machine, it's already there. Also, it'll install the native client files for SQL Server 2005 on the screen. We're going to go ahead and choose Next. The next thing that's going to happen is it's going to fire up the System Configuration Checker. So it's loading that right now, taking a look, and basically scanning our computer's configuration. As soon as we click Next, boom, runs through them all. Here are all of the required and non-requirements as well. It pretty much throws everything in here. If you have a non-blocking requirement, it'll give you a warning such as IIS and a few other little things as well in here that isn't a non-requirement. But it also gives you all the requirements. We have the Windows Management Instrumentation Service, the Microsoft's version of the XML runtime, operating system minimum requirement, the service pack level, the SQL Server compatibility of the operating system. And again, these are just all the requirements that it goes to. There's 14 of them. It'll check them all. If any of these fail, it'll tell you why, if it's an error or a warning, and of course a detailed message on why. And you can also view a report here, which will pretty much just give you the same information in a window. And you can print this out, do anything you want with it, but just good information to tell you if you meet all the requirements. The next thing that's going to happen is it's going to basically take us through the registration screen, so it'll install, pretty much load up all the required packages. I'm going to go ahead and put this information in and click Next. So here is where we basically install and pick and choose all of our components. We can get pretty customized here, and that's what I'm going to show you in a second. But we're going to go ahead and install everything here. Database engine, analysis services, reporting services, notification services, integration services, and our workstation components. If you're installing to a virtual server, SQL Server Setup will actually detect that you are and ask if you want to install a failover cluster for both the SQL Server database engines and the analysis server engine. So that's kind of cool. Let's go ahead and click Advanced here just to show you the level of customization that we can get with each of these. And this takes a little bit to load up because it's analyzing, basically it's loading all of these since we have every single one of them. And then here you go. So we have database services just like installing Office, a piece of cake. So it tells you how much this feature is going to take up, what actually is involved in each one of these services and components. And then you can also tell it what to install, replication, full text, shared tools, data files. You can see you can get pretty detailed here. Not too bad for a SQL Server installation. And again, we're installing absolutely everything here. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click. You can see by the default, it does not choose the sample databases or the sample code and applications. We're going to go ahead and install everything here. So I'll click on that, choose entire feature, and now we are installing a complete instance of SQL Server 2005. So we'll go ahead and click Next there. Next screen, it's going to ask us for an instance name. What do we want to do? Do we want the default instance? We'll just simply assume the name of this computer, and that's how clients will access the SQL Server. And also developers and USDBAs will all access this the same way if we use the default instance just by the computer name. Otherwise, we can give it a named instance here, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to name this SQL 2005 test since it's our local kind of play version that we can, it's our local sandbox, so we can do whatever we want with this version. We have our production SQL instance over on our SQL Nugget machine along with our true development instance, hence why I call this kind of our local sandbox here. You can also view existing instances by clicking on the Installed Instances button. That'll give you all the currently installed instances and their versions. We're going to go ahead and choose Next though. The next screen has us specify what our services are going to run under. And you can customize this for each account if you'd like to. If you want each service to run under a different account, you can do that. I'm going to actually choose all of them here. You can also have SQL Server agents started by default. If you do that, SQL Server must be started since it's dependent upon, SQL agent is dependent on SQL Server. We're going to go ahead and type in an administrator account here, our local domain admin, and for the CBT Nuggets domain, and choose Next. The next screen is going to have us specify our authentication mode. So this hasn't changed at all from SQL Server 2000. We're going to basically choose mixed mode here. In other words, we're going to allow trusted connections using Windows accounts, and also SQL Server has its own authentication method using just standard SQL login and passwords. We're going to go ahead and specify that we want both of those, and we'll put in an SA password. SA, of course, being the system administrator password for the SQL login, and choose Next. The next screen is our collation settings, and a collation settings just basically tells SQL Server how it's going to sort the data and also what character set to use. And this is because, of course, SQL Server is used all over the world in different regions with different languages. So it's going to try to default it based on your Windows settings, and of course, all the default standard Eastern settings are 1252 code pages, 1252 character set in Windows. So that's why it kind of chose that one for us by default. Also here, I want to mention, you'll notice this little exclamation point. It's telling us analysis service is going to use the Latin_1, Latin1_general_C1_AS collation set. And really what this is this is a Windows collation. You'll notice up here we have two separate types of collation settings. We have collation designator and sort order. This guy up here, this is the Windows collation settings, where these are SQL collation settings. So if we click Customize Account, for instance, with SQL Server, it can use either Windows or SQL Server's built-in collation settings. If you choose Analysis Services, however, Analysis Services cannot use SQL collations. It can only use Windows collations. So that's why you're seeing this when we do not customize it for each account. It's just kind of telling you that Analysis Services is going to use the default Latin 1 general collation settings. So that's it for that. We'll go ahead and choose the defaults here and choose Next. The next screen is Reporting Services Configuration Options. And basically what it's telling you here is it can use the default configuration, which is really just setting up the name of your instance is going to be the same name as the SQL Server instance. And then it's going to default your virtual directories. And since we don't have SSL installed on this machine, the certificate is not installed. It's going to tell you that it's not going to install it. So what I like to do is configure this stuff myself. So I'm going to choose Install but do not configure the server, and we'll save that for a reporting services video down the road. We'll do it ourselves. So let's choose Next. One of the final screens here just asks us, do we want to automatically send error reports to Microsoft when fatal things happen and bad things happen? And also, do we want Microsoft to track what you're doing, what features you're using, so they can make better decisions in the future about the product? Yeah, we'll say no there and keep on going. The final screen here just basically gives us a summary of everything that we chose, and we'll go ahead and choose Install. And basically what it's going to do here is just prepare everything, all of our options, wrap it all into a configuration file, and off it goes. And right off the bat, it starts installing every component. Here's kind of the new interface and how it works. You can see while it's installing, you can click on any one of these items, and boom, it'll pop open its dedicated log file and give you pretty much what's happening every single millisecond as to what's happening inside of our installation. Very, very slick here that everything has its own dedicated log file. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to let this run, and I'll be back as soon as it's done installing. And there we are. Setup is complete. So you can see setup finish next to every single one of our components. You can click on one of your components and it'll pop open its dedicated log file, again with everything that happened in the install for that component tracked. So that's some good information. Also, if you click next here, what'll happen is it'll basically give you a summary log. And if you click on the summary log, this will show you again every single component, the machine, the product, basically the component that was installed, if it was successful or not, the version, and also the dedicated log file path. So this will give it for every single component inside of here. Also, you can run the surface area configuration tool, which will just basically, since we did install some extra components here, that'll go ahead and it'll run a surface scan on everything, lock down anything that may be a hole or may be open to a security risk. So it's a good idea to run that just in case. But we're going to go ahead and click Finish here. Now, one more thing I want to show you. If you do want to access those install files after a setup is complete for whatever reason, maybe you noticed something was wrong and you want to know what happened, well, let's go right-click on my computer, choose Explore here, drop down the C drive into Program Files, scroll down to our Microsoft SQL Server directory, and if you go into 90, and of course 90 is of course 9.0, the current version that we're on, SQL 2005. Since we do have a 2000 instance, 80 holds all the tools for our SQL 2000 instances. But if we go into the Setup Bootstrap directory and you click on the log file directory, check this out. Here's the summary.txt, exact same thing. And then this files directory holds all of the log files for each component. And if your components get too big, it'll split out the log file into multiple log files. And that's all. Just that's useful information to know. Now, how do we configure this instance? Well, let's go ahead and run into SQL Server Configuration Manager by going to the Start button, dragging up to Programs, over to our SQL Server 2005 installation, into Configuration Tools, and here we are, SQL Server Configuration Manager. We'll click on this, fire it open here. So here's what we get with SQL Server Configuration Manager. Our first node here is pretty much all of our services. So this is really what replaces before our Service Manager back in SQL Server 2000. If we go over to SQL Server 2000, Service Manager here to start and stop specific services, this node here replaces all of that. Now you can still, of course, manage these services through the MMC console snap-in inside of the control panel or inside of administrative tools, but this just kind of centralizes them inside of the SQL Server Configuration Manager. And there's a couple of things you can't do in those areas that you can do here. And just to kind of show you here, integration services is not instance specific. That's why you do not see brackets with the instance name under it. Neither is the SQL browser service. Everything else is. So just to take a look at some of these, let's look at the one we just installed here by looking at specifically the SQL Server for SQL 2005 test. So you can see this is for SQL Express. Here's our SQL 2005 test that we just installed. If we double click on this, it's going to pop open with a little dialog here with a couple of tabs. First, of course, the services, the service stuff. What is the service running under? We already specified all this when we started it up. You can stop, start, pause, all that fun stuff inside of here. Also, on the service tab, this just gives you basically some metadata about the service and also the start mode. If you want it to automatic, disabled, manual, this you can do in the services MMC snap-in. This is the stuff you can't though. On the advanced tab, we have all the specific stuff to SQL Server, such as the dump directory where the log files are stored, and error reporting is pretty much dumped to. Also shows you the data path. So this is just really good information, good stuff to know. Also, of course, the startup parameters that SQL Server, this specific instance, runs under. But again, this is just good information to know, and it's a lot more intuitive, a little more informative than previous versions of SQL, because anytime you click on one of these, check it out. It kind of gives you just a little tidbit on what this specific property does. The next node we're going to take a look at here is our SQL Server Network Configuration node, and what this does, this replaces, back in SQL Server 2000 and here, going to Start Program, SQL Server, the server network utility in SQL Server 2000 is replaced by the 2005 Network Configuration node. So basically what we have in here is for each instance you'll have a child node underneath here. And how this works here, if you click on this, this is just basically telling SQL Server what protocols it will listen on and service requests from. And you can see there's 4 of them here. SQL Server Standard by default enables shared memory and enables TCP/IP, disables named pipes, and VIA, which is your virtual interface adapter. Shared memory, just to run through these quick, shared memory is just simply connections from the local machine, and that's it. Named pipes is good for local area network connections, bad for wide area network connections. TCP/IP, of course, good for everything. And virtual interface adapter is hardware specific. You need special hardware for, of course, SQL Server to service requests from the VIA protocol. And also, each one of these has their own specific properties on them, so you can double click on it. Everyone has the enabled property, either enabling it, yes or no, and then, of course, you can do keep alive. And again, there's specific properties here for each one of these. But just to show you a little note here, SQL Express disables everything except shared memory. That is, of course, because it's built for local development, standalone applications on the local machine. Standard enables, again, shared memory, TCP/IP. Enterprise enables all of them except virtual interface adapter, of course, since it is hardware specific. We also have the SQL native client configuration. And of course, this is then going to replace, in our programs and SQL Server here, our client network utility. And basically all we can do here, you can configure the client protocols, and this is basically only for the local machine, only for clients that access the SQL Server from the local machine. This is the order that it will attempt to access the SQL Server or request anything from the SQL Server. Aliases is how we can basically create a different name to access the same server. So if you right-click and choose New Alias here, you can give it a different name, what port it's going to listen on, what protocol it's going to attempt to attach to, and then, of course, the actual server name that it's pointing to. So just a way to give clients another way to connect to the same SQL Server using a different name. So you can see Microsoft made it much easier for us to configure the server by centralizing all of our configuration tools into one MMC snap-in rather than having 3 different tools to basically configure the server. So that makes things a little bit easier. Let's jump into the SQL Server Management Studio and take a look how we would configure an instance. So let's go down to Start here, up to Programs, on over to SQL Server 2005, and right down to Management Studio. We'll fire this baby up. And as soon as it opens up here, let's go ahead and rather than registering one here, I'm just going to show you how to just jump right in, connect to Object Explorer, and off we go, configuring. So we're just going to change this to our SQL 2005 test because that's what we want to connect to. And we'll choose Connect. And you can see rather than go ahead and registering a server, what it did is just connect us right into Object Explorer so we can ad hoc here do whatever we want with the server. So configuring an instance is pretty similar to SQL Server 2000. We just simply right-click on the instance and drag on down to Properties here and click on Properties, and that'll bring open a dialog box. And get familiar with this because this is the brand new way of viewing properties in SQL Server. We're going to get familiar with this dialog box because it's not your standard typical old dialog box with the tabs on the top like it used to be. Now we kind of have a little more structured dialog box. Over here on the left is each node, each kind of section of properties that we can configure. Down here is kind of neat. This gives you some connection properties, what we're currently connected to, who we are, and of course, if you click on this View Connection Properties, this is really neat. It shows you pretty much everything about your connection. The method that you connected, the database that you're connected to by default, your SPID, security identifier here, network protocols, just everything about your connection. So, good information. Information is good, right? Other things, of course, is your little progress bar. If you're doing anything, if you're saving anything, that'll take a while. This will just basically show you where you're at. You can script virtually anything you can think of in SQL Server 2005, which is really nice. But what we're going to do here is go through some of these tabs. You can see the General tab just gives you general information about the current instance, the name, the product, the operating system, platform, version, so on and so forth. If we click on the Memory tab, these are your memory options. And of course, just like SQL Server 2000, you can see the configured values and change them, or you can see the current running values of the server. We're going to stick with configured values here. Some of these options for memory, use AWE to allocate memory. AWE is the Address Windowing Extensions API, basically saying your SQL Server can support up to 64 gigabytes of memory. You also can specify minimum memory, maximum memory. SQL Server does a good job at dynamically allocating memory. We also have other memory options. Index creation memory, of course. This is how much memory it'll use to create indexes. And of course, 0 means dynamic, and is the recommended setting, of course. And also we have minimum memory per query, 1 megabyte of minimum memory per query that SQL Server will dedicate to each query. Let's jump on over to the Security tab here, and if you want to learn anything about any of these other tabs, you can click on the Help button up here. This will actually give you pretty good context-sensitive help regarding each one of these options, and good little tidbits of information. On the Security tab, however, here, we have the server authentication. What is SQL Server going to allow? What kind of accounts can connect to the specific instance of SQL Server? Windows authentication mode only, or SQL Server and Windows authentication mode for our trusted connected users here. We can also do login auditing. None, failed logins, successful logins, or both. These will actually write them out to the Windows event log if you choose anything other than none. Server proxy account is used for the XP command shell stored procedure because you can do things such as impersonation. And that's what this whole server proxy account is for, and you can give that proxy account and the password. And some options down here, C2 audit tracing. If you switch this flag on, basically what will happen is every single statement and every single object that is ever altered throughout this entire server, every database, will be traced and logged inside of the data directory on the hard drive, inside of program files there in SQL Server. Your specific instance will have a data directory, and it'll just fill up with files for every single object that is touched. So this is, if you want really high level of auditing, turn this flag on. And also cross-database ownership chaining. This is just saying that all of your databases in this specific instance can be the source or target of cross-database ownership chaining, which just basically means that objects and objects inside of our database can depend on other objects in other databases. And the last node I want to show you here is the permissions node, and this is going to be the permissions for the actual to access our SQL Server and do things such as we're doing, configuring it and such. And this is basically, you have your users up here or your roles, logins or server roles. You can select one of these and then you can choose what permissions they have. And it just kind of shows you here what permission they have, the grantor of that permission, and then what they can do. If you're granting them permission to actually do this specific task, or if they have permission to also grant permission to this task, or deny them specifically and explicitly not to have permission to do that task. So pretty simple here, you can add users, roles, logins, such like that through the Add button, or remove them out of here using the Remove button. And you can also view their effective permissions by clicking on the Effective Permissions button. So that's all this is, just the Permissions tab for, again, accessing the actual server itself and doing things such as we're doing. So once you're all set configuring your specific instance, you just click OK here and boom. All of the configuration changes will take effect, and that's it. And then we can right click on here and choose disconnect from our server, and boom, we're done. That's all there is to it. Not much to configuring it, and it's a lot easier than previous versions of SQL just because everything is easier to access and more centralized, and of course a little more intuitive here with the new dialog boxes. Alright, so in this CBT Nugget, we took a look at installing and configuring SQL Server 2005. We started off by running through installation. We took a big look at the different additions out there. We ran through some of the installer enhancements. We saw that 2005 now uses the Windows installer, which gives us a higher level of customization. It's a lot like installing Office. Plus, we get a lot more detailed logging and a better summary. It's just overall a much cleaner environment when running through our installs here. We then took a brief look at upgrading to SQL Server 2005 and saw that if you're going to do an upgrade, absolutely use the Upgrade Advisor. It'll save you a lot of time and hassle in the long run. And at the end of our installation here, we actually did a physical installation. We ran through all the screens in an installation. We saw where the log files are stored and pretty much just saw how much easier it is to do an installation than previous versions of SQL Server 2005, mainly due to, of course, that Windows installer. And at the end here, we took a big look at configuration. We saw how to configure our actual server using SQL Server Configuration Manager. We then took a look at how to configure the instance itself and also some security-related configurations there. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I thank you for viewing.